What's the most fucked up thing you've seen at work? A guy knew he was getting fired, so he took a shit in the trash can in his cubicle. Nobody knew if he did it there or took it into the bathroom to shit in it, but he did it one way or another. He got called up to HR and was let go. Then the people working in his area started complaining about the shit smell and, sure enough, I found it in his little trash can. Then I called him to ask about it and he said it was an old burrito he forgot to throw out. It was not an old burrito he forgot to throw out. In a way, it might have indeed been an old burrito. A processed old burrito. It was later dramatized on SNL. The most fucked up thing I saw was my boss being stabbed by his wife. Was he fucking a side chick in the stairwell? The continuity in these comments. I do not choose this guy's wife. Saw a guy fall 40 floors onto a large pile of cast iron piping as I was walking off for lunch. Didn't end up eating lunch after that. You gonna finish that? What, this old burrito? That's some messed up shit, mate. The guy who I replaced in my first laboring job fell ribs first into D12 reinforcing steel sticking up from the foundations. Lovely way to be introduced to a job. Guy cut his finger in the deli slicer and tried to keep cutting lunch meat for a customer with blood everywhere. He's more dedicated than I would be, lol. Ouch. I was working at a butcher shop, and one of the butchers politely came up to me and whispered that I needed to finish deboning a lamb shoulder for a customer. She accidentally stabbed herself and needed to patch up her tummy. Luckily it wasn't deep, but not a great thing to hear. An apprentice at a shop I worked at slipped with a boning knife, while trying to bone a pork shoulder and embedded it in his thigh. The manager opened the office door to find him with his pants around his ankles hopping on one leg. I'm still not sure how he managed to get his pants off with the knife still in his leg. Coworker ended up ODing and no one in his family told his dad. The only reason his dad found out his son died was because the dad called the company to see if his son still worked there. My boss had to be the one to tell him the bad news because no one in the guy's family was willing to tell him. Kind of reverse of this. I heard this secondhand, but a guy's sister passed away, and someone called the place he worked and told the boss. The boss did not tell him until his shift was over because he had nobody to cover for him. The dude was obviously livid and went to upper management to complain later, which fired the boss. Still, how the hell do you become like that? My God. First you tell the family, and that's the worst thing you've ever had to do, and then a few weeks go by and you're feeling better and then some guy calls and says, hey, does Odie work there? My son Odie? This is his dad. Needed to get in touch with him to go over some things but his phone isn't working. Do you know him? Looks just like his old man, rugged and handsome. Ha. Anyway, is he in? I couldn't. Geez. Why is the son named Odie? Saw one guy drop dead, office job. One get an arm cut off, pulp mill. One get degloved, paper mill. But the winner was the day we walked into work at an auto parts store and found the assistant manager fucking another assistant manager in the ass. Just going at it. Were they raw dogging or did they use Jiffy Lube? Was it in the stairwell? Box cutting job saw a guy die after losing his arm to the machine. I still to this day don't know how my roommate at the time kept going to work for another few weeks before quitting. We'd go to work stoned off our asses every day, and seeing the guy die was a nope for me. I knew it was far too easy for the same mistake to happen to me stoned. Wasn't gonna get sucked in and die for $15 an hour. Any heavy machinery related job since I've made sure to ask about work related accidents and how common they are along with when the last one happened. I saw a coworker get crushed to death under 6 tons of dirt. I helped dig his body out. God, thanks for reminding me of my construction days when I was 18. We were cutting out a trench for something. I'm thinking it was a water line of some sort and was fairly deep. It was just a muddy mess, and after about 5 days straight of rain, everything was waterlogged. We had just started the workday when we heard a ton of yelling further down the trench. Turns out the shoring that was preventing the trench from collapsing had given out and buried a man inside up to his shoulders. Luckily, he survived but wasn't in a great state, had broken most of his ribs, and both his legs from the weight of the ground hitting him. The worst part was that while we were digging him out, just how serene he was. The guy had fully accepted that he was going to die. Damn. This is why at my company we don't do any shoring. After 4 feet all our trenches have to slope away from the hole at a 45-degree angle. It's a pain when you're going down deep but nobody ends up buried. This was at Bethlehem Steel, Sparrows Point, Maryland. I was working at the ore pier at the time. Ships would come in carrying iron ore and other materials and be unloaded by tower cranes. Material would get loaded into hoppers, fed out onto conveyor belts. These belts would transport the material to where it was needed in the steel making process. The belts would spill ore and dirt constantly. At one point inside of a building, A belt toward the top of the building would spill down onto a slanted roof that was covering a motor on the ground floor. We would have to periodically get on this roof and clean the spillage. There was a huge chunk of dirt built up in the corner where the roof met a wall. My coworker was chopping away at this, breaking pieces off and sliding them down to fall off. The entire chunk broke away, hit him, and carried him off the roof. After hitting the ground, it broke apart and buried him. We got off the roof as quickly as possible and began shoveling him out. We carried his body to a bay door where paramedics were already arriving. I'll never forget what happened next. The paramedics started CPR on him. His hands sunk into his chest to the floor, and the chest rolled up around his hands. Everything inside was pulped. They pronounced him deceased then and there. 2 things. Pulled up to work. Dude runs out of the store and is immediately shot by a dude behind me. He was stealing and the other guy just shot him. I called out that day. I was the only guy on the front end and a dude had went into the bathroom like 50 minutes ago. So they sent me to check, found him slumped over dead. He OD'd and died in our fucking bathroom. I went home after that. At least your strategy is consistent for addressing these scenarios. We've noticed you've been calling out from work a lot. Just know that impacts the whole team, management. Also, we are short today cause folks called out dead, so buck up. I saw someone who had fallen into an industrial shredder and unfortunately went through. I have seen this as well. I then had to watch the video footage with the police and investigators. I still battle with the images year later. 2 very small mistakes were made by that operator that day, and resulted in him not going home. I will never forget his children's faces at his funeral. Oh my good God. Yeah. I was a firefighter and paramedic. I used to work with special needs kids, ages 3 to 7, and one of them came up to me on a Monday morning and told me her dad died over the weekend, then skipped off to go play with the rest of the group. I learned later that day that he had overdosed on heroin and I'm assuming she hadn't fully understood what being dead meant, and that she thought she might see him again. I have a severely disabled Bill. First time someone close to him died he told them it's time to wake up at the funeral. He's old enough now to have realized these people never come back again, but I still don't think he understands fully. The way they process these things is incredible and very sad. I had a client whose mother died and he would say the most heartbreaking things. It's not fair that you have a mother and I don't, being one of them. His mother was very young, and died tragically. My mom died when I was around 8 and I was upset at first, but I don't think it really hit me until a few months later when the teacher said we were making Mother's Day card in class and I just started crying and didn't really understand why at the time. I'd had an argument with my friend that morning and thought I was just upset at that. A guy losing a finger because he tried moving an industrial strength fan without turning it off first and his finger slipped through the grate. Thankfully I didn't see it, but I worked with a guy who got part of his finger taken off by an industrial mill. People were supposed to turn it off before cleaning it, but we're taking about a company that didn't even have a safety shower or eye wash station in the lab. Safety protocol were not generally followed. Seriously, I don't know how more people didn't get injured at that place. It's a matter of time. They sent him to the lab area I worked in while his nubbin healed enough for him to go back to manual labor. I worked in a manufacturing environment among heavy equipment, lots of cutting tools, forklifts and chemicals. We had a shipping dock and a lot of antique production machines from the 1960s. I suggested we have a company-wide meeting with every employee twice a year on safety, teaching everyone where the emergency shutoff is for equipment and how to do eye wash. BTW, did you know shutting down a machine at the breaker will often destroy $1 million piece of machinery? I didn't. I also made the company buy multiple eye wash stations and a first aid kit. I added fire extinguishers suitable for the area and had them serviced every year. Anyway, some idiot calculated how much money that meeting cost the company and those safety meetings stopped. Owner refused to allow me to paint danger zones on the floor around the machines, operator only, and safe walk areas. Nope. He put a stop to all of it. Afterward, I saw one of the salespeople on a ladder in the warehouse in flip-flops. Oh, and half the staff got COVID. Worked at a call center. I was in the break area on the second floor and heard a guy getting into an argument with his soon-to-be ex-wife. I walked away and back into my call area and about 30 seconds later the whole call center went into lockdown. Found out that the guy decided to kill himself and jump head first into the concrete floor and landed right in front of my coworker. He was granted unlimited paid days off and paid therapy for the rest of the year. HR greater than we know you can't usually afford therapy, but for once you'll be able to pursue it. Take any number of days and just talk it out. Carrot please, don't sue us. Carrot haha. Worker greater than it was like a watermelon being smashed at a summer fair. Why would you sue the company because a coworker killed themselves? Honest question. Damn, could you imagine getting ready to walk up steps and boom, the amount of force him hitting the pavement would have made a terrible sound. Lucky you missed that horror. Opioid addiction patient would inject directly into open wounds in her biceps. And I'm not talking small wounds. Both her biceps were eaten away. There were little thready bits of tissue that were inconvenient because they would get caught on stuff, so she cut them. She was in her mid-20s but had started using as a teenager with her mom. She would get bloodstream infections and heart infections and leave before finishing treatment. Edit. Obligatory highest comment edit. She cut them. I imagine she didn't have a traditional relationship with pain at that point in her life. Just saying. Jesus. I was addicted to heroin for 15 years. Thankfully, I was trained as a phlebotomist, so while my veins didn't exactly survive my addiction well, I never experienced an abscess or any infections. 11 years later, I have some minor scarring and typically need ultrasound for blood draws, but I came out of it all right. For anyone who doesn't understand the value of needle exchange programs, which also teach safe injection practices and other harm reduction methods, as well as offering a pathway to recovery, seeing a patient in that kind of shape, I would hope would change their minds. Everyone deserves a chance to get better. I'm a nurse. Used to work on an oncology unit. One of my patient's family members walked into the wrong room by accident. The patient in that room had passed away and was shrouded, waiting for transport to the morgue. She threw herself on the body, weeping, thinking it was her loved one and no one had called her. Then we realized what happened. It was not good. So, similar sad healthcare story. Elderly nursing home patient in her 90s with an amazing badass life story. She was among the first to catch COVID. Amazingly she survived, though mentally she deteriorated. Because she survived this, each new COVID patient became her roommate. 6 deaths in a row. On number 6 they misidentified the body as her. Family couldn't visit prior to a vaccine existing. Family was falsely notified of her death. Roughly a week later the funeral director figured it out and he notified the family that she was in fact not dead. Nursing home never apologized. They pulled her out. I do a lot of transport work for a local morgue and we've had plenty of mislabeled bodies from hospitals. One lady even got chopped up for spare parts wrongfully. My friend was telling me about his sibling in-law's grandmother, who donated her body to science. About 18 months after she died they got a very respectful call saying they were finished with her, had cremated her remains as she wished, and would send the ashes to the family. Family receive said ashes, inter/scatter them, and carry on. 12 months after that they get another very respectful call saying they were finished with her, had cremated her remains as she wished, and would send the ashes to the family. Luckily the family member who received the call just laughed at them and said, "Who the fuck did we get the first time then?" The second call turned out to have been an admin error. Craned an old grain bin that was cemented into the concrete slab it was on. The bird shit, feathers and carcasses made a firm floor about 2 feet deep. Inside were about 15 pigeons who looked like they never seen the light of day. Some were too fucked up to fly, or too young. One was pink, like bald and absolutely the offspring of multi-generational incest. They were all fucked up. They couldn't get out because the only place to escape was the cap at the top, which is impossible for a bird to fly vertically through without messing up their flight on the roof sheets. I'm guessing they survived off of the grain left inside it, and cannibalizing the dead. Most farmers in my experience air out the bins and leave ways for birds to escape before we show up to do work. But that was probably the nastiest farmyard I've been in. There were 7 other bins just like it in a row. That is a truly disturbing thing to imagine. Multi-generational incest. This makes me think of a Stephen King short story. Guy get crushed and killed by machinery he was working on while on a scissor lift. Also saw some guys test the fire system by piling a bunch of trash on the floor of a loading area, dousing it with lighter fluid and igniting it. Turns out it worked. I was in the Navy as a weapons system guy and part of my training was working with an older missile system. So naturally I break out the manuals. We have to move and handle these things, so I want to know the environment they can handle. First page says they tested the danger of explosion by shooting it with a .50 caliber rifle and then dropping it from a crane at 100 feet, then dousing it in jet fuel and lighting it on fire. My first reaction was, damn, these things are safe. My second reaction is, holy hell, who was in charge of testing these things? The gang from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. So anyways, I started blasting. Worked with a guy at a retail store. He came in one day with one red eye and the other normal, so I asked if he was okay. He said yes and said his pet rabbit scratched him while he was playing with it. I didn't think anything of it until about 3 days later when he got arrested, charged with the murder of a pregnant woman and her fetus. He partly dismembered her body to try to hide his tracks, and when he realized that wouldn't work, he then burned her house down with her body inside. That's when I realized that those scratches were really from her fighting for her life. His name is Matthew Brush, and as far as I know, he's still in prison. Damn, I went to HS with this guy and know the victim's family. Super fucked up when that happened. What an absolute psychopath. How is it that man has a chance at parole? This is pure evil. It's November right before Christmas 2011 and CEO told me, CTO, to fire a guy so we could make our bonuses for the year. I replied, his wife is dying of cancer and has 2 months at most to live and he has kids. Just fire me and you'll make your bonus. Without so much as a blink he said, well, what would you do? I said, I can defer some equipment purchases to the next year and that will cover the $30,000-ish you are looking for. He said, great, do that. He literally didn't care about another human being who was at the lowest of their lows. I'll never forget that, and fuck you, Rich. Take 3. Fuck you, Rich. Yeah, fuck you, Rich. Airline pilot. Watched a guy die in the Nashville terminal once. Gate C10. He keeled over in his chair waiting for boarding. EMS was there almost immediately. They did CPR on him for a good 15 minutes, way past when everyone knew he'd passed. The part that's haunting was watching it click for his wife that he was gone. Her reaction. I'll never forget that. In most jurisdictions, there is a minimum amount of time you're required to work a CPR before you can terminate attempts at resuscitation. Ours is 20 minutes, starting when ALS providers arrive, so at least one medic on scene, not just EMTs, as well as some clinical findings you have to use to justify it. The big 2 criteria being analysis of a heart rhythm in asystole or P below a certain rate, usually 40 BPM, for the duration of the attempt up to that time limit, and a capnography, CO2, reading below certain thresholds with no improvement. If at any time, they show signs of spontaneous circulation, if they crash again, the timer starts over. And when we do go to terminate, we must get authorization to do so from an online medical control doctor after giving a report of our attempt and findings. If they say no, we gotta keep working them, load them, and keep working them until they get to the hospital. I've worked countless CPRs on people who were very obviously not gonna make it, but you gotta keep pressing on for even the most remote possibility for survival. Like, we're talking hundreds of little old ladies who are 101 years old or so, wasting away, 90 pounds dripping wet, with a medical history of everything bad ever, in hospice with a daily medication list that finances a whole pharmacy single-handedly, with bones as fragile as a pigeon's, and the family still obviously expects all heroic efforts. And it's hard, because CPR can cause a lot of bodily harm in the best circumstances, the kind of trauma a 100-year-old isn't going to survive, even if we get her heart beating again. Even if it's futile, we're still expected to give it everything we've got. The 20 minutes is why my dad is still alive. He had a heart attack. They kept doing CPR and he came back. I'm putting it very broadly, of course, but he was dead for like 5 minutes or so. This was almost 20 years ago. He is still with us today. Thank you for what you do. Sometimes there is hope. Hey. My best day as a pilot was when a passenger dropped dead as she was walking up the jetway in MSP. First officer started CPR, I called CFR, and then had the flight attendants give me the AED. I pulled that fucker out, learned how to use it in 20 seconds, slapped the pads on her chest, defibrillated 3 times and got her ticker ticking again. She was talking in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. Fo still talks to her occasionally. Pretty good day. I worked at one of the busiest Walmarts in the country during spring break for 6 years. I wouldn't even know where to begin. I guess the drunk lady leaving the bathroom with her pants around her ankles while actively shitting as she walked across the front of the building and back outside into the wild. None of the workers wanted to deal with it, so they parked a shopping cart over each turd until the cleaning crew came in. I didn't see the person do it but discovered the evidence. They had somehow managed to walk around an entire display of bread and a few laps of the bakery area, and shat the entire time. This wasn't human, I swear. It was horrible. Boss instructed me to clean it up. I said not without a full hazmat suit, mask, gloves and a fucking shower after. He went out, got me the things and said, once you're done, go home. By this point I finished in an hour. I hated that dude. That last part is hilarious because I would do the same. Way too underpaid to deal with that nonsense. But it's still just hilarious they did that. Once saw someone step into a bucket of hot fryer oil. It got into their shoes and everything. Was so bad that when they took the shoe off it peeled of skin with it. The person had 2nd and I believe 3rd degree burns. He never came back, but I saw the pictures and it was horrific. I saw this happen to a guy wearing a heat protecting glove. Worked in a kitchen. For whatever reason he wasn't wearing the latex glove you're supposed to wear on the outside. Guy dropped something into a boiler on accident and went to grab it quickly, I guess thinking he could grab it before it went in the water. Instead his hand went into the water and the glove held boiling water on it. When he pulled the glove off all the outer layer of skin came off too. When I was a dumb teenager, I was cleaning out the fryer on a Monday when we closed early. Forgot to let it cool down, so the oil in the 5 gallons Home Depot bucket began bubbling the plastic. Fortunately I got away from it ASAP, but holy shit what a mess.